Your democracy is a sham, and here's why. The vast majority of you watching this reside within what's known as a liberal democracy, and since the day you were born, you've been beaten over the head with the idea that this is what freedom looks like, that this is what democracy looks like, where the people truly govern themselves. Now, of course, as we grow older and we mature, we slowly come to recognize our democracy is flawed, but many of us still hold on to the idea that
capitalism is good. If you have more social programs, capitalism is good. Slurp, slurp. Yeah. Yeah, this would represent America, that everything is just shifted to the right, and if you don't like one of the two candidates are on offer, then tough luck to you. I guess you can vote for the less bad option, if you call that freedom. Who might do whatever they want.
Fundamentally, our liberal democracies at their core are truthfully democratic, and all we have to do is enact the right reforms here and there, and we'll successfully bring our flawed democracies in line with this democratic ideal. I'm going to take a giant shit on this idea. I'm going to go on to highlight that. All of the ways in which your democracy is flawed, in which the people's will is consistently subverted in favor of the rich and wealthy, are not random accidents, but are emblematic of a deeper contradiction between liberal democracies and democracy proper. That liberal democracies at their core, stripped of all their rhetoric and theatrics, are nothing more than a class dictatorship, and that no amount of liberal reforms can change this reality. These are bold accusations, sir. I know.
I mean, ultimately, money is your vote, right? Money is the relative power that you hold in society. Well, there could be other sources too, source of power, but money would be the easiest to quantify.
But I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll come to understand. And if not, you can add me on Twitter. All right, before I start, let's get the definitions on the table so we know what the hell we're talking about. A democracy, in the clearest and truest sense, is rule by the people. The people are not subject to the will of a ruling elite or mad tyrant. Rather, the people rule themselves. This is... Rather, the people rule themselves.
Yeah, you can even vote for a guy who claimed to stand for your interest, because, like, even best case scenario, I'm gonna assume just completely naively that this guy is the beneficial, or gonna be the top representative. They truly try to do the good thing, but let's say that everyone votes for them and they try to do what the mob wants, but they cannot do that. It is impossible for them to do them. They might try to do some good things. They might be able to do some safe things, like, okay, people probably want shelter, food, and maybe want more money, but, like, cannot make the decision, like, do the people want to go to war for oil? Like, they cannot make that decision. So that would need to be up to the people. And the most obvious form of democracy would be some kind of a communism with direct democracy. So not authoritarian.
This is an incredibly egalitarian form of governance, and it's an ideal liberal democracies insistently claim they represent. Liberal democracies can be understood as consisting of two key components, representative democracy and capitalism. The political sphere is marked by regular elections, where you get to go to the polls and vote some asshole to government who will, hopefully, represent you in your interests. Meanwhile, the economy is characterized by private ownership and control over the means of production, and the miserable bastards who don't own anything have to rent themselves out to these capitalists. Maybe next time work harder, dum-dums. Side note, already we're seeing a contradiction between democracy proper and liberal democracy. So, you can vote for who...
Yeah, but even your choice every 4 years is pretty influenced. Like, you get to vote on one of two guys, I guess, generally speaking. And, like, suppose that wasn't the case. You have multitude of options. You vote for your favorite one, who tries to represent your interest. And that would be the closest and more honest way of running a representative democracy. They must still fuck it up, and let's say that they have to do it, and if any sign of not doing it, then they are just kicked out.
Vote for who your president is or prime minister.
This is kind of still naive, but sure. I'm just kind of outlining the variables that would make representative democracy more useful, would work better.
For your federal and provincial representatives, but you can't vote for who your manager is. You can't vote for your CEO. Under liberal democracies, economic decisions are privately made, and these decisions are imposed on the people. Interesting. We're going to put a pin in this and come back to it later, but as I go through this video, I want you to keep this in the back of your mind. All right, so when I say your liberal democracy is a class dictatorship, specifically a dictatorship of the capitalist class, what exactly do I mean? If you don't have a strong sense of what class is, I recommend you go watch my video on class, as these concepts build on each other, and it'll help in understanding this concept and this video. Right, so when I say class dictatorship, I'm not talking about some conspiratorial dictatorship where a secret cabal of capitalists meet up every Wednesday and set the agenda for the week. What I'm talking about is a very rational dictatorship that is founded on a political system that lends representation accordingly to those of wealth and capital. What this means is that individual capitalists are free to use their wealth.
I would like to lower my taxes. So they lobbied the politician, bribe the politician to make it happen. I would like to keep minimum wage down. The main way you do this is by keeping the people poor and weak. I mean, there's a reason why you would have to pay like $1 per day to people living in Bangladesh, because they are fucking poor. Right? Now, I'm not saying that the capitalists make them poor, but they're certainly not giving them the value that they are making. And you can even see this in many countries, first world countries, that you have like first world cities and possibly second class towns, and everything else could be like even third world. Who knows? So it gets real bad. Like you might see like essentially like slave towns where like one factory or like a few factories where the only game in town, and like everyone's paid like minimum wage, even if even that. A lot of people could be working on the table, and there's just no way to go up. Everyone is just depressed, and there's no hope. I would like Venezuela's oil. Oh yeah. So you can just go to another country, just do capitalism there, and just buy everything. The true capitalist way, just buy everything, and give the country some money that they have to give back. So with some interest payments, and now you have basically entire country into debt slavery, where they have to work in your factories. And the only way they can escape this is they just walk out of the country. They're technically not locked inside, I guess, but it's close. I would like another government subsidy. But if you think that you can just come to own your country, come to become a billionaire working there, yeah, you're a little mistaken.
Their wealth and capital to pursue their material interests through the political system. There's no need for mass collusion across the entire class, just a rational pursuit of class interests. So what you find is that these avenues of influence are used to ensure the state ultimately protects and advances the interests of the capitalist class. Regardless of what the majority, the working class, wants, the will of the capitalist class is imposed on the people. It's why you can have the overwhelming majority support this or that policy and not have it pass, or even up for a vote. It's why you can have the most unpopular pieces of legislation pass with absolute ease. Because it's not about whether or not the majority supports it. It's a question of whether or not the capitalist class supports it. Now, a quick point. What needs to be understood is that although this is a single class that rules, it is not a monolith. The capitalist class...
The easiest way to conceptualize it is that it's really up to money, right? How much money you have is how much your will is represented in politics.
Class is not a hive mind. There are genuine disagreements between varying factions of the ruling class, and debate, although restricted to a very narrow range of ideas, is often incredibly lively and intense. However, what unites them as a class are their fundamental class interests. That is, first and foremost, the preservation of private ownership over the means of production. So, a big debate right now among the capitalist classes of various imperial nations is around the question of how to deal with the growing discontent within the masses. One faction, albeit a small and unpopular faction within the capitalist class, admits, we might have went a little too far with neoliberalism. How about we just throw some more crumbs at the people and maybe they'll shut the fuck up? Versus a very popular faction within the capitalist class that says, I'll beat your goddamn dick off if you ever come at me again with that nonsense. I want to keep as much of my wealth as possible, so fuck that. How about we just distract the idiot masses with some nonsense? Distract the idiot masses with...
Although I would argue that the leftist ones are quite rational, because it makes sense to keep a game that you're winning instead of possibly risking a revolution just to gain even more.
Beat your goddamn dick off.
So interestingly, the aspirants might be more on the right.
If you ever come at me again with that nonsense, I want to keep as much of my wealth as possible, so fuck that. How about we just distract the idiot masses with some nonsense? Or maybe this whole thing will just blow over, and we don't have to really change anything. The question that remains, of course, is if this is a class dictatorship, why waste your time putting on a show of democracy? What's the point? The point is legitimacy. It's a lot easier to maintain this dictatorship when everyone is convinced the system is just, that the system can legitimately respond to their demands. Convinced the system...
Yeah. Even when it comes to workplaces, like, what are you gonna do? Like, ask for like all the money you make them? That's not gonna work out. So what people would have is that they start sharing their salaries, they start uniting completely, and they start striking, or possibly even taking stuff. Now that fucking works, right? You can never really vote yourself in power. If they wanted to give it to you, you would already have it, essentially.
The system is just, that the system can legitimately respond to their demands. With this legitimacy, all energy for change within the populace is channeled through this electoral system, where capitalists have available to them these avenues of influence that can neutralize and tame anything the capitalist class doesn't approve of. What's really important to note here is that these are non-violent methods of subverting the people's will. By cultivating this legitimacy, you encourage the people to channel their energy through the electoral process, where you can non-violently tame their will. The last thing you want is the people taking up revolutionary methods of change, because the only way to deal with a revolutionary movement is overt state subversion. And these overt displays of violence are not popular, and are only going to radicalize more of the populace against you. So, to ensure the stability of this class dictatorship, you need the people to believe the system is legitimate, steer people away from revolution, and keep explicit state violence to a minimum. In the original script of this video, I spent the majority of it meticulously outlining, one by one, and explaining all of the avenues through which the capitalist class impose their will. But I slowly came to realize I was beating a dead horse. These avenues of influence have been covered ad nauseum, and it's a reality most of us who are politically aware understand. Most of us recognize the role paid professional lobbyists play in writing our laws, swaying the votes of public officials, and providing the research our laws and regulations are based on. The majority of us recognize how absurdly expensive it is to run for public office, and to do so either means you have to come from the capitalist class, or you must subject yourself to the interests of the capitalist class. Once in office, there is an incredibly strong incentive to play nice with capitalists, because after public office, they're the ones who can provide you with a lucrative and comfy private sector position, and can grant you a life of abundance and ease.
Essentially, when it comes to politics, just look at the incentives. What is your incentive when talking to the people? Your incentive is to tell whatever the fuck they want to hear, right? You're just gonna say that. That doesn't mean that's what you're gonna do. That is just what you say to them. And otherwise, what is your incentive? Your incentive is to get as many bribes as possible, right? So people hear the message. The whole point is to just get elected, right? If you're not bound to do what they want you to do, I suppose, you can just do whatever. And most people are not really watching what you do anyway. So you can just keep supporting those who keep serving those who actually paid you. And when it comes re-election, they're going to be even more appreciative. So again, you just say whatever the people want to hear, and again, just take as many bribes as possible. And you might say like, oh, that's not going to be me. I'm going to be the good guy. Then you're going to be losing to those who do this.
We recognize that political participation itself, outside of voting every couple of years, is an incredibly expensive and time-consuming endeavor, a luxury only those from backgrounds of wealth and capital can afford. I can go on and on and on. This is all well understood. However, what does need to be addressed is this liberal notion carried by liberals and social democrats that these avenues of influence are not reflective of anything deeper, but rather are just random aberrations, the result of bad people in office. And all we have to do is enact the right laws and elect the right people, and our liberal democracy will be a true democracy. This is absolute nonsense. Capitalism is in direct contradiction with democracy. You cannot have a democratic society under capitalism. When the means of production, the means of subsistence on which everyone is dependent on, society at large is dependent on, when these are privately owned and controlled, these individuals are free to dominate society. To have a democratic society where the people truly rule themselves, you cannot have just the political sphere democratic. The economy itself must be under democratic control as well, where the economy is run by all, in service to all, not private profits, not for petty tyrants, but for the people, where the economy is run to house all people, to feed all people, to educate all people. This is the project to educate.
It is worth saying that it would be a far more efficient and distribution of resources and way to use human capital, because countries could be losing, I think I read about the UK, it was like losing like billions, many billions, hundreds of billions, that the people are just don't have stuff. Like imagine if like Einstein, right? Like if they were born in a trailer park, they probably would have not made much of themselves. So you need people to shine, essentially. And capitalism is not really a good way to facilitate that.
Educate all people. This is the project of socialism, to bring the economy under the rule of the people, to democratize the economy, to bring about a society in which the people rule themselves. So, we now understand the root contradiction between capitalism and democracy. How are you to have a democratic society when the economy is privately run by an elite in service to an elite? Bringing this all back to the topic at hand, it's from this root contradiction where all other avenues of influence within our political system are free to spawn. This private economic power, wielded by capitalists, is used to coerce the political sphere into submission. That's a bit abstract, but a great example of this exercise of economic power is when companies like Amazon promise to bring jobs to the location most willing to ease taxation and regulatory laws. Because capitalists like Bezos privately dominate.
Also, they don't have a choice, because most people in our world has to rely on wage labor. In the past, most people just had a way to make a living themselves, but now that people need jobs, they don't have like their own fields or whatever to make their own living, and the way of like making a self-employed living is kind of tricky. So most people would need to have jobs, and therefore the business owners have a lot of power.
Dominate the economy and are the ones who can grant subsistence to the people. The people in the political sphere are dependent on these petty tyrants. You can work for decades, tirelessly passing all of the laws and regulations required to outlaw every conceivable avenue of influence within our political sphere, but without the abolition of capitalism, without the abolition of private ownership over the means of production, the root of capitalist power remains, and all avenues of influence are free to reemerge once again. Look, I love what you're doing, but some of these laws are pretty authoritarian, restricting my freedom of speech and all. You know, if you don't roll back some of these laws, I'm going to have no choice but to move my business somewhere else. And it'd be a real shame if your economy tanked. All those poor souls thrown to the pits of poverty, all because of you. Tragic. Look, Ra, I understand. I recognize capitalism needs to be abolished if we want to build a truly democratic society. That's why I believe we should fight like hell to get elected and legislate the abolition of private ownership over the means of production. That's how we'll achieve socialism, through the ballot box. This is a really common line of thought among those who've just recently become leftists, and it's rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the state. I don't want to spend too much time on it, just because in the future I'd like to make a video dedicated to exploring and debunking this notion of ballot box socialism, but I'll quickly touch on it. The idea that you can achieve socialism through the electoral process is based on the idea that the state is this neutral arbiter of power that exists above society and class conflict, and whoever gets elected, whether it's a dog of the capitalist class or a candidate of the working people, the state will cooperate with them. Let me be clear, the state does not exist above society. The state plays an absolutely intimate role within class conflict as a tool of class oppression. Like I said earlier, you live under a dictatorship of the capitalist class, and all of the state institutions, the police, the military, the bureaucracies, the courts, and so on, all of these institutions serve capitalism and its maintenance. The idea that you can just take these capitalist institutions and use them to abolish private ownership is unbelievably naive. These institutions will oppose you in the fullest and subvert your electoral socialist project at every turn. But okay, let's say the state is neutral, and you fight like hell to get elected, and by the stroke of God, the capitalists can't stop you. This is where, once again, we must recognize the roots of capitalist power, this private economic ownership and control. Once you're in office and you begin to make moves towards the abolition of capitalism, the capitalists will not hesitate to absolutely tank your economy. They will not hesitate to hoard basic necessities, burn fields, burn factories, remove assets from the country, sabotage everything they can to drag the nation into chaos in an effort to reimpose capitalist rule. Whether it's
they steal what they can and destroy what they can't.
the people who oust you and install a capitalist-friendly state, or foreign capitalists from imperialist countries who reimpose capitalist rule. Normally it's a military coup, but in this fantasy world, again, the state is neutral. Latin America in particular is filled to the brim with these examples of ballot box socialists who are ultimately undone by their own domestic capitalists or by a good old capitalist invasion. Socialism can only be achieved through revolution. Your democracy is a complete and utter sham. You live under the dictatorship of the capitalist class, a dictatorship whose power is rooted in private ownership over the means of production. It's from this root where all other avenues of capitalist influence come from. And without the removal of this root, you cannot have a democracy. To have a democracy means the people are to rule not only the political sphere, but the economic sphere as well. This is the socialist project. And this socialist project, this project of democracy, cannot be achieved through bourgeois electoralism. The socialist project is a revolutionary project. I want to thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this video. It took me forever to write the script, just because I had like that entire section listing